Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Here is another very interesting and very informative video for you. I have recorded this video specially for research students, those students who are actually involved in doing their MS, master level or PhD level research. So this is going to be very informative for them. In this video, I will give you some tips about how you can read a research paper. This is very common that being a researcher, being a scholar, you have to go through several papers before writing your own paper or research thesis. So this is very informative for all the students who are actually involved in any kind of research. Here is the roadmap for today's presentation. I will start with some time statistics. Here I will talk about how we can manage or how actually people around the world manage their times. Then I will talk about an approach which is very effective, and actually this approach is based on a research paper that has been published in a journal and with the same name, How to Read a Paper. So this is a three steps approach which you can easily adopt while you are going to read or start reading a research paper. And then finally I will give you some useful tips for reading a research paper. So let us talk about how much time we have in our whole life or how we can spend them. You see, actually we have very little time for ourselves. You see, for example, we give a large amount of time while we are working. We spend a large amount of time for education, and also even while we are eating or drinking something. So we spend almost 4 years while eating or drinking, and while driving we can spend approximately 1.3 years. Similarly, we spend 2.5 years in grooming, like doing something in washroom while stuff there. Okay, and also we spend a large amount of time while we are sleeping, 28.3 years, and that is almost 1/3 of our life, which this statistic shows that we spend a large amount of our time while doing nothing. This is the actual statistic. However, is today we are so much dependent on social networks. So this is the actual statistics, how we spend our time. And you see, most of the time that we spend, they are actually on the activities which are very useless. For example, beside from actually doing some sport activities, we are involved ourselves in online gamings, which is people are there who are going to support online games, but I do not. So you have to spend your time while doing some physical activities, which is actually important for your mental health as well as your physical fitness, right? And also we spend a large time in educational activities, but actually we are not doing something useful. We are surfing the internet. Even we are using the internet inside our classes. The lecturer, the faculty member, the professor is delivering a lecture, and the students are engaged in surfing the internet. So that is how we actually spend our time. And the food that we eat and the drinks that we take, they are also not healthy. So they have negative consequences on our health and also our mental activities. So we have to be conscious about how we spend our time. Being a researcher, you have to spend your time in two different things. Not only two, but they are the most important. The first thing is you have to spend your time while reading. Reading is not for pleasure. While you are reading for your research, that is not for pleasure. That is for criticism. That is for getting insights into the idea. While you are reading, you have to challenge each and every statement of the author, right? So you have to spend your time in two things: reading and writing. Okay, so actually there is an easy, effective way of reading a paper, and we call it a 3 pass approach or 3 phases approach or 3 steps approach. In a summary, in a nutshell, in the first phase, you do not need to read the whole paper. The objective of the first phase is to get a general idea about the paper, what the paper is about, right? In the second phase, you go deeper. You grasp the paper contents. But here again, you don't need to read all the details. And the objective of the final step is to better understand the paper, to deeply read the paper. Here you have to read the paper in much details. So how we can follow this approach? Let us explore these steps one by one in detail. So the first phase, when you pick up a paper, then you have to apply the first phase. In this phase, you only need to read the title of the paper. The title will give you a clue whether this paper is related with your area, whether this paper is interesting, whether it is useful for your own research or not. If you agree with the title, if the title attracts you, then you have to read the abstract, which is like a summary of the whole paper, and then the introduction, right? So this is the first phase. Do not go into details, just read the title. If it interests you, okay, start reading the abstract. If not, reject the paper. There is no need to read the paper, right? If the title attracts you, then read the abstract. If the abstract actually it will provide you a summary of the whole paper. So if you find it more attractive, useful for your own research work, then you have to go for the introduction. Remember, you don't need to read it word by word, the introduction section. No, you have to scan the introduction portion. Here you have to focus on the sections, subsections, like the headings of the papers. And then finally you have to read the conclusion of the paper, what the authors conclude from their work, from their results, what are their final remarks about the paper. So this is like scanning the paper without going into the details of the paper. So this is the first phase. If at the end of the first phase you are able to find answer to the following question, then you are successful. For example, at the end of the first phase, you would be able to categorize the paper. For example, the technique used in the paper, you will be able to identify it. Let's suppose we are talking about wireless communication. So which wireless technology the authors actually used, whether it is Wi-Fi, whether it is WiMAX, 3G, 4G, LTE, IEEE 802.11p, 1504. What is the wireless standard that the authors address? So you can categorize the paper based on communication, and then you can identify the context of the paper. What is the problem that the author is trying to address? What is the context of the paper? What is the background of the problem of the paper? What are the main contributions of the paper? How the authors approach to solve the problem? And then you will be able to find whether the paper is written clearly. Remember, I will mention one thing here. Clarity in writing, especially in technical writing, is very much important. You have to impress the reader about your writing skills. If you have a very well investigated problem, if you address a very challenging problem, you get very interesting results, but you are not able to present it clearly, then your work is useless. You have to sell your results, your work, and for that clarity is very much important. And there are several tutorials available, several courses available on how to technically write a paper. Okay, so the focus of this video is not on writing, it is on reading. But just to mention a few words, I focus here that clarity is important for writing. Well, so in the first phase, you only read the introduction, the abstract, the conclusion, and the headings and subheadings of the paper. Now, at the end of the first phase, you will be able to go further or not. So you have two possibilities. Either go further reading the paper or stop reading the paper. It depends on the output of the first phase. So if the paper still interests you, then you have to go to the second phase. In the second step, you have to go a bit deeper, not that much, but a bit deeper. So you have to carefully look at the figures, the diagrams, the charts, the graphs, the tables, or other illustration in the paper like algorithms, etc. Here you can also highlight the most relevant references which you think that they are relevant to your work or they would help you in the future. So you can mark them, you can highlight those references as well. So here you will have to focus on the illustrations given in the paper. At the end of this phase, you would be able to grasp more contents about the paper. You would be able to summarize the main thrust of the paper. Remember, it is not important that you will be able to understand the paper completely at the end of this phase. Sometimes you do not understand the paper even at the end of the second phase, because reading is a skill. More specifically, reading a scientific paper is a skill which require many techniques. Some of techniques are mentioned in this video. Okay, so if you are not able to understand the paper, doesn't matter. Few reasons are here. It is possible that the subject matter is new for you and understanding new technically concepts is a bit difficult. So with time you would be able to understand them. Doesn't matter. Similarly, the terminologies used in the paper, they are very much difficult or they are unfamiliar for you. So that is the reason why you are not able to understand the paper at the second phase. Similarly, some experimental techniques, some analytical techniques, the equations mentioned in the paper or the proof the author used to prove a concept, they are actually new for you, or they are a bit difficult for you, or you are not good in mathematical skills. So it could be a reason, or maybe the paper is poorly written, that is why you are unable to understand it, or maybe you are tired, you are not willing to read the paper, you are not in reading mode. So there is also a possible reason. So at the end of this phase, you will conclude that whether you should need to continue reading the paper or you have to stop here. So basically you have to take one out of three decisions. Number one, never read it again. Okay, so you passed the first phase, but at the end of the second phase, you decided that the paper doesn't suit you, doesn't interest you, is not relevant, or you are not able to read it. So you can ignore reading the paper, stop there. Or maybe you can put the paper on aside and then later on you come back to the paper with a fresh mind, or after reading some background, some context, and then enhancing your skills or getting yourself familiar with the terminologies that are used in the paper. So after some time you can get back to the paper. Or sometime you can actually ignore this phase. If you are not able to understand all the equations mentioned in the paper, if you are not able to understand all the algorithms, if you are not able to understand all the proof of concept, doesn't matter. Go to the third phase. Well, there is a question that how you will be able to understand the paper in the third phase while you are not able to understand it in the second phase. So this is very interesting. However, I would recommend to go to the third phase and continue reading. It is possible, quite possible, that at the end of the third phase you would be able to find the answer that you were searching for, or maybe something new appear in your mind while reading the paper or while criticizing the paper. The final step, the third pass. Here you have to do more work. Now you have to read critically. You have to identify the challenges. You have to challenge the assumptions of the author. You have to challenge the presentation techniques in the paper. You can actually suppose more solutions. You can actually have to reason with the authors that, hey, the technique you have used is not that much efficient. Why the author doesn't use this technique? Okay, here you have to write down the future work, ideas for your future work, or how you would be able to differentiate your solution from the solution presented by the author. So here you have to go deeper. At the end of this phase, you would be able to reconstruct the paper, the entire structure of the paper in your own words. You would be able to write down the whole summary of the paper in your own words. And this is very much important for writing literature review. Sometimes it is difficult for the students to write a summary of the paper that they read. So actually they do not follow a systematic way of reading the paper and a systematic way of writing the summary of the paper in their own words. So normally they use synonym or rephrasing software tools for doing that, which is a bad habit. So you have to write the summary of the paper in your own words, and that is only possible when you follow the three-phase approach. You can also challenge the assumptions made by the authors. For example, the authors are performing an experiment and they are doing something which is related with mobility. For example, we know that if we are traveling on a highway in a supercar, then the velocity of the car goes beyond 120 km/h. So if an author is performing some experiments and he consider a very low velocity for the vehicles, like 30 km/h on a highway, so there is like an assumption which is not possible, which is not relevant to the real world scenarios. So you can actually criticize the authors for their assumptions which are against the real world scenarios. Okay, so this was a three-phase approach, and if you follow this approach, you would be able to understand the paper very well. Now, some tips while you are reading the paper, some useful tips. The first thing is that you have to read critically. You do not need to obey all the orders that the author is giving to you in the paper. You have to criticize the author for several things. Why you do not use this technique? Why you made this assumption? Why you do not consider real world scenarios? Why you have made these assumptions? Plenty of questions. You have to criticize the author for several assumptions, for several techniques, for several solutions that the author is trying to address. So you have to read critically, and that is important. But criticism doesn't mean going personal with the author, right? I remember my professor told me that we can fight for ideas in the classroom. So fighting for idea is something else, while going personal with someone is something else. So you can criticize the author for many different things. And then you have to read creatively, not passively. You have to read actively. You have to engage yourself in the process of learning while you are reading a paper. So read creatively. While you are reading, you have to think that how I can propose a different solution, how I can solve this problem by using a different technique, how I can improve the technique of this author or this researcher. So you have to read creatively. And then you have to make notes. Remember, highlighting is different from making notes. There are some researchers who are against highlighting the text, right? So for being creative, you have to make notes. You have to write in your own words. But remember, the notes are like the summary. If you write 24 pages of notes, so it means like you have noted the whole paper. It means that every word of the paper is important for you. In majority of the scenario, that is not the case. You have to focus only on what is most relevant, what is more beneficial for your work. And for that, you have to write them down. Summarizing the paper is very much important, not only for literature review, but also for remembering the concepts of the paper later on. After some time, you would need to read the paper again. So there are two ways. The first approach is that you have to read the whole paper again from the start by using the three-phase approach. The second thing is, if you have written down the summary of the paper in your own words, then there is no need to read the paper again. You just need the summary that you have written in your own words. So it takes less time to reread the paper in the future. Or you can share the summary of the paper with other researchers, with your professors, or you can even present them to your colleagues as well. So summarizing the paper, but how to make a summary is another important topic. Right? There are some useful tutorials available that you can follow how to summarize a paper. How to write a summary is actually a skill. And then comparison. Well, this is important. You read two papers and then you need to compare the two papers. Or sometimes you have to compare your own results with the work of someone else, already existing work in the literature. Remember, comparison must be like identical. If you are comparing oranges with apples, so nobody is going to like it. You have to compare oranges with oranges and apples with apples, right? Because they are two different categories of although they both are fruit, but they have different nutrition facts. So for comparison purposes, you have to give details to the technicality of the problems. And another tip is that related with the comparison is that while you are comparing two different things, you have to make sure that you are actually supposing the same conditions that the author has used before your work. For example, you are performing some experiments by using WSN. So what are the number of nodes that the author used in their work? You have to use the same number of nodes. What are the communication protocols that the authors have used? So you have to use the same technologies. This is not necessary that always you have to use the same thing. You can use a different protocol, you can use a different algorithm, a different technology, a different communication standard, but then you have to give reasons why you have selected that protocol. So comparison is important, but you have to make sure that you are actually comparing the right stuff. So this was a short presentation in which I talked about how to read a paper. So whenever you are going to read a paper, you have to focus on the three-phase approach. In the three-phase approach, the first phase is important, in which you have to read the title, then you have to read the abstract, introduction, headings, and then you have to read the conclusion. And then you have to decide whether you have to go further reading the paper or not. Second step, you read the headings, subheadings, illustrations in the papers, the contents of the paper, the equations given, assumptions, etc. And the third phase is the final phase, which is like writing the paper in your own words. You have to criticize the author for the assumptions, and you would, at the end of the third phase, you must be able to rewrite the paper in your own words. And then some useful tips about how to read a paper. So you have to read the paper critically, you have to read the paper creatively, and then you have to write the summary, you have to take notes, and then you have to concentrate on the comparisons as well. So with these words, I'm going to say thank you to all of you for watching this video. If you are not subscribed to my channel, do subscribe to be in touch with some more useful videos. Thank you so much. See you in another video. Till then, bye.